Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Doug Cook. I'm a NOFAMAS board member, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Sea to Soil, Local Kelp as Fertilizer with Sean Barrett. Sean Barrett is a co-founder of the Montauk Seaweed Supply Company, and serves on both the Maine Resources Advisory Council at the New York State Department of Marine Resources Advisory Council at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Federal Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. His community fisheries and kelp farming work has been featured in The Guardian, Time Magazine, NPR, Grist, New York Times, and on PBS, ABC, and the Smithsonian Channel, while also being recognized by the United Nations and the World Economics Forum. Before we jump in, I have a few more details that I'd like to share with you. We here at NOFAMAS are trying to strengthen our commitment to racial equity and justice by examining whiteness and dismantling systems of white supremacy that are part of many dominant systems, including our agricultural and food systems. We also want to honor the indigenous land stewards who are the original occupants of the land that we're currently living, farming, and residing, and waters, of course, being an aquaculture. So please use this link and find the areas that you are living in or work in and learn more about the historical stewards of that land. As well, we are calling on everyone, especially our white allies and co-conspirators, to action on a few items to assist BIPOC-led organizations. And those actions are listed here on this slide. So you'll see this slide coming up throughout our event. And we are hosting 2 events for Spanish speakers and BIPOC members specifically. As well, we want to go over a couple of etiquette things. We invite you to put your questions into the chat, and I as host will be monitoring them along with Laura Davis, our co-host, and we'll bring those up at the appropriate time during the meeting, during the event. Please make sure that if we give you an opportunity to come off of mute and ask your question, that you go back on mute just to preserve sound quality for everyone else. Of course, this is being recorded, and everyone who registers will be able to have that recording a little bit later, I think next week. We, of course, want to say thank you to all of our sponsors who help us make our work, and especially the winter conference like this, a big success. So please be sure to visit them and show your thanks. As well, our online auction is happening, so check that out. You've got until Sunday at 6 p.m. when the auction closes, so keep your eye out and, bid early, bid often, as they say. We hope you check out our vendors. They have some really great discount codes for all of the attendees. And with that, I also want to let everybody know that throughout this year of 2022, we are being supported by the New England Biolabs Foundation to explore the possibilities of regenerative ocean farming on the North Shore of Massachusetts. So we're going to have some more specific information about this region. And this project seeks to identify the possibilities and limitations of regenerative ocean farming, including kelp and shellfish farming, both individually and as parts of an integrated system of sustainable aquaculture, and the role of such activities that this role could play in increasing economic vitality and food sovereignty in our local communities, as well as performing ecosystem services and addressing climate crisis. So we're just really excited to launch this year-long project here at the Winter Conference. You'll be able to revisit some of these events, as well as visit with us, hopefully in person in the spring and fall of next year, where we are actually going to go visit some of our farms in the area, or as close as we can get. So we hope you'll stay tuned and keep checking in on us. And of course, we want to thank the New England Biolabs Foundation for making it possible. So with that, I am very pleased to turn it over to Sean Barrett, and joining us today as well as Don Gable. Don Gable is a plant health specialist.
And a very good friend of mine. Good to see you today, Don, and thanks for the intro, Doug, and thank you very much, Laura and NOFA folks, for having us here today. I'm very grateful to you guys for putting this together and for pushing through all the recent challenges with this kind of new COVID wave and stuff. It's been a real interesting experience to see your team just navigating through and adapting and moving forward and getting all of this online. And we were just talking with Doug before this began, just about how much change and adaptation has happened. But we're just very impressed with your guys' work and very grateful to be here with you today. So I just wanted to say thanks to Laura and Doug and to the NOFA folks for having us. And also, I think thanks to everyone who came to this panel and who has an interest in kelp as fertilizer. I feel like and an important theme that I've experienced in some of the earlier sessions here today, and I know is integral to NOFA's work, is also paying homage and showing our gratitude to Indigenous peoples, and ultimately where a lot of our work currently is. I'm going to give a brief overview of kind of where we've been and where we're at and where we're heading. But a lot of the roots of our work actually are in Indigenous ways and traditions and methods and techniques. And so we work very hard. Our headquarters is squarely located in Laura's summertime neck of the woods in Montauk. The Montaukett tribe people is a federally recognized tribe. The Montauk is very small. It's very small land that they have there. But I grew up and spent a lot of time in the Shinnecock section, the Shinnecock Canal area of Long Island on the South Shore in the Hampton Bays. An area called Good Ground is the colonial name, Hampton Bays, but Shinnecock on the map. So we've worked with Shinnecock very closely in this space too. And the more that we speak and talk and work together on these regenerative kelp farming and soil, seed to soil techniques and methods that we're reintroducing, it's just interesting to see how a lot of the things that we think are, whoa, these great new inventions, and we get grounded and humbled often by some of the elders and at the Shinnecock specifically, who let us know that these are by no means new, and that we're really just reviving ancient techniques. So I just want to take a moment and express gratitude for that whole part of our work, the foundation that we stand on. And then I think, just to give you guys a little background about myself, I don't come from a farming background. I am new into the soil space. I work in seafood and fisheries largely, but Dock to Dish out of Montauk is the operation that I had been running for a number of years. And I think it's kind of important to give a full picture of this work that's going on now, to kind of back up a little bit and just give a brief history and overview of that work. And ultimately that the Dock to Dish story began, I tell this as the tale of two hills. So where we grew up, right down the road, is one of the oldest CSAs in the country. I think this is their 33rd or 34th season, Quail Hill Farm. And a very, he's a good friend of mine, Scott Chasky, who began that CSA there now coming up over 3 decades ago. He wrote a fantastic book called This Common Ground, Life on an Organic Farm. And so we had grown up kind of with CSA kind of inculcated into our culture, and we were very familiar with CSA for many decades. It was just kind of like part of our culture kind of growing up, and the idea of having a share in a local farm and being a member and being directly connected to the farm, and the interconnectedness and the kind of spiritual element of a CSA that Scott always drove home to us, and being directly in tune with the seasons and what's most local, and having that relationship directly with a farmer. So over the years, I saw, Scott's model as a CSA was solving a lot of the problems that we saw. I grew up on the seaside, on the ocean side, with a lot of commercial fishing friends, and I had been obsessed with fishing and seafood from my earliest age. So we saw these major departures in the seafood space that we were constantly trying to solve this disconnect, where by the late 1990s into the early 2000s, somewhere in the range of 90% of our seafood was being imported, and the whole local market, like especially in Shinnecock, Hampton Bays, that entire fishing community had really just been extincted or just put to rest. Basically, it was a fraction of what it had been, what I remember even in the 1980s. So one day I kind of had this idea to see if Scott's model, CSA, could work for seafood. So I went and met with Scott. We took a long walk at Quail Hill. It was a cold day like this. And this was over 10 or 12 years ago. And he said, let's give it a shot. Let's see if CSA model can work in seafood. And so Quail Hill became the first hill. We then started a pilot program with the Concerned Citizens of Montauk Association, and that took off like a rocket ship. It was a kind of a magic carpet ride. It was super successful. We had huge waiting lists. Everyone was thrilled to be reconnected with the local fishery in Montauk. And then the second hill came along, which was Blue Hill, which is there's a chef, Dan Barber, I'm sure most of you know or have heard of. He kind of has pioneered a lot of farm to table work, and his restaurant Blue Hill at Stone Barns had long been a place that we studied and watched. We went on very special events, or went to their, the Stone Barns Center for learning events and things. And once in a blue moon, we'd get, to go for a special dinner there. But Dan's work at Blue Hill was the other kind of hill in our story. So essentially, looking back on it now, we really took the best ideas we could from the farmers to see if the solutions that they had pioneered in the agriculture space could be applied to seafood. And so we really translated community-supported agriculture into community-supported fishery, and know your farmer into know your fisherman. Farm to table became dock to dish. So it was just a translation of Scott's work and Dan's work that worked like a charm in seafood fishery space. So with Dan's help, he tutored us and mentored us and helped us from the very beginning to create the first restaurant-supported fishery in the country. And that model then spread all across the US. So, and we ended up creating these programs actually all over the world, Central America, out in Fiji, South Africa. We helped the Hook to Cook program. So why that's important is in the course of that work, going back 7 or 8 years, we discovered a lot of waste in the seafood space. And so in our processing, we'd always end up with a lot of waste. And so one of the ideas we had, it was around Thanksgiving time. I'm sure everyone knows the legend of Squanto, which we later learned is not actually historically accurate. But where, the pilgrims were saved by Squanto, a Native American who taught the pilgrims to bury some fish, a bunker specifically, menhaden, in the soil. And that's ultimately what saved the pilgrims. And that's where the folklore of Thanksgiving was born. So we had, once again, a bright idea to see if we couldn't take all of our leftover fish waste and start bringing it to the local farm. So that was the seed for where bringing nutrients from the sea into the soil really began there. And concurrently, we had been working for quite some time watching with oyster farmers, and we'd been kind of working with some kelp farming enthusiasts over that time, and started to look to see where could we access large amounts of nutrients from the sea to fortify and strengthen the soil outside fish. The fish part, I should mention, we ran into some problems with that, as some of the farmer folks here, I'm sure, know, especially if you can imagine in Montauk and Amagansett, the aroma of rotting fish coming off a farm is, the Hamptonites don't love that. And also fox and raccoon and stuff started digging through the farms and the soil. So we realized we had to go a different route. So I think there's some interesting laws for farming in New York State, the water. And so I serve on a few councils, and we started to push through some laws to make it legal to farm kelp in our area. So we recognized that kelp could be, and seaweeds had the potential to be the driving force behind this vision of, if 20 years ago was farm to table and 10 years ago was dock to dish, that the next 10 years we wanted to dedicate all of our efforts and energies into sea to soil, to making these direct connections and bringing strength from one area to another. And we saw that kelp could fulfill that vision. So fast forward, COVID actually obviously hit in a very serious way for us in Eastern Long Island, and shut down all the restaurants we worked with. We had a swath of time there where we were like, hey, this is an interesting place where let's start to really push forward with the sea to soil kind of vision and the idea. So I went back to my roots. I went back to the farmers. I went back to Dan and his brother David. And we had a lot of long talks about just launching and getting this work going. I also went and met with some of our local Shinnecock members and got them involved in this process. And we just went to work and created the Montauk Seaweed Supply Company, which is essentially now up and down the East Coast. There's kind of a ocean farming renaissance happening in a lot of ways. And we have kelp farmers beginning to produce pretty robust crops of sugar kelp right now, specifically. And we recognize that our ability to connect those farmers with land farmers was something special, and that the time had come. So we created the Montauk Seaweed Supply Company and launched last spring into the summer. Brought together our whole community once again, like we did with Dr. Dish. And I think that's where we derive all of our strength. As always, it's like it takes a village, as they say, but our community, when they rally behind us and really get in a supportive mode for something like this, is where we see our strength and ability to rise pretty quickly comes from. So at the end of last summer, we put together a quick video, which Doug, I think, should have queued up now, which will give you guys a little bit of background just about our local community on the East End and how the sea to soil movement is beginning there. These are good friends of ours who we worked with last summer to do some experimenting and trial runs with some of the kelp products that we created. So let's see if Doug can bring that up.
Here we go.
It's nighttime. Starts at night.
Yeah. Sorry, it's a computer glitch. Hopefully.
Doug, can you get the volume up?
Are a living being.
What do I love about gardening? I just couldn't even imagine life without it. Everything I do, I know because I'm doing it without harsh chemicals, without toxics, and in tune with the place. Everything I know, I'm doing something good. Sometimes you can eat it, or other times you just watch the amazing display of butterflies, and this whole place is just always buzzing and flapping.
Doug, I think We have some technical difficulties there.
It could be my internet connection. It's not the best.
Okay, you want to maybe pause for a second and see. Laura, were you able to, did your audio cut out on that? Laura, David?
It was cutting out.
Hello, my friends and family. My name is Standing Buffalo. I'm of the Buffalo Clan, and I'm a Medewan Montauk man from Shinnecock.
That was Shane. We got his audio, but we missed the video. What do you think, Doug? Can you reboot that and start it again, or save it for a different time?
I'm gonna try again.
Doug, yeah.
Try again. So also, I'm going to, for everyone, drop it into the chat, the link to these videos. So the first link, it says video 1. That's the video we're watching now. And there's going to be a second video a little bit later. If that doesn't work out, these links that I just put in the chat now, those should help you out. Yeah, I think it had to do with maybe my software or could be my internet is not so fast. But if this one doesn't work, then we might skip the videos.
Okay, cool.
My name is Standing Buffalo. I'm of the Buffalo Clan, and I'm a Medewan Montauk man from Shinnecock. My given name is Shane Weeks, but Bijikidni Boit is who I am. And we are here on the Shinnecock Reservation at a garden that I care for.
After billions of dollars of research and development by the
Our area has quadrupled in population. Knowing the state of Shinnecock Bay and Hetty Creek, which is what surrounds us here at the head, it's paralyzing knowing how bad things are. There's very little natural lawn care right now, very little things that are just left to be natural. And a lot of fertilizer is finding its ways into our seas and our water and our food.
There's endless opportunity for kelp because it's completely no impact. And how could that be bad as opposed to other methods of creating fertilizer, even the good ones? I think this is the best one. This bed just got a giant dose recently of kelp and planted with my fall crop of mustard greens. And they germinated in like 2 days. I don't know whether it was the kelp, but they germinated so fast. We put kelp in here and it's exploding. 2 weeks ago, this plant was just reaching the top. And every day it grows a couple feet. Pretty much everything here got a dose of kelp this year.
We've been growing this garden as a whole. We've been trying to spread into other spaces within it. We've been doing a lot of cover cropping, moving into new areas, so we're trying to just grow more and more for them and do as much of their production as we can.
We used it in the melon patch and it looks like it's sort of doing a good job, a really healthy melon. And you know, just generally, I think we're excited to sort of explore some more opportunities, both in the farm and on the table.
This is a brand new bed, and we loaded it with kelp. It's coming along, because these were tiny plants. Most of them were just stuff we plucked from our other beds, things that we knew the deer wouldn't eat. And it's starting to happen.
Using kelp specifically is new to this part of the area, right? But traditionally, we've used seaweed in our gardens. These are the first Shinnecock and Montauk beans that have been grown on Shinnecock land in near 100 years. I first built a smaller version of this in 2017, and it was maybe a third of the size. And then this year I decided to expand it. This is the most substantial garden that I've been able to caretake for. I had no idea that this kind of corn got this tall. I think that says quite a bit. You know?
Everybody gets taught like these basic things to do so that you could sustain yourself if you need to, and how to use what's around. It would be a failure not to teach your children that. It would be a failure as an individual and as a community, because we would lose our gifts.
Oh, nice, Doug. We got through it. All right, cool.
All
All right, yeah. So that, oh man, that I'm glad we got to show that, guys, because that's some of our good friends there, and also made me remember warmer times during the spring and summer months, which was nice. But yeah, a lot of the local kind of pioneers, especially Shane and the Shinnecock, who are helping us to revive this concept and bring it back, this ancient techniques of using kelp and seaweeds and we're also learning, not really as a fertilizer so much. When I get into the soil science with a lot of the specialists and experts, and lucky enough for us, we do have one here today. My friend Don Gable's coming up to speak after me, because where I have a lot of experience in the sea and the ocean, and that part of the sea to soil formula. I think I'm always humbled. As many years as I've been in this space, I go to work every day and continue to learn new things. That teaches me, like, the more I learn, the less I know. And so for me, trying to venture into the soil space, where I've learned, like, talk about just a vast soil science, has been this incredible learning journey for me over the last couple of years, but over the last year intensively. And my great mentor and tutor in this space largely has been Don. So I'm going to turn this over to Don Gable now, who's our plant health specialist. He's going to give you guys a lot of good information about the benefits that come from using kelp and seaweed in soil for farming, gardening, vineyards, lawns, all of these kind of places where we're using synthetics or other types of fertilizers or amendments, or these, and on our side, on the production side, I should say, we're now working with a series of kelp farms from Maine through Massachusetts down into New York, where we have a pretty much, not infinite, but a very robust supply of for the first time ever, farmed sugar kelp that's coming to market. So we have a really busy spring and summer ahead of us, and we just want to invite everyone to come join us in the sea to soil movement. I often will get warned about talking too much, so I'm going to shut up now, but let everyone know that if you visit montaukseaweed.com, especially our story, there's a lot more information there and videos. The video that we just watched and a few other videos we've created and some press and things like that are accessible at montaukseaweed.com. And that's it. Over and out from Sean B. And now I'm going to hand it over to my good friend, Don G. Take it away, Don.
Okay, Sean, thanks an awful lot. Boy, I kind of like I got a lot to do here to keep up with you. So my slant here is going to be right from the plant end of it a little bit. So why kelp meal? That's what you have to ask yourself. There's a lot of additives or soil conditioners out there, biostimulants, organic plant fertilizers. There's all kinds of additives, a composted mushroom, this, that, brewer's yeast. I'm sure you get bombarded, and there's probably lots at the conference to look at. But brown kelp meal, or maybe in the future we'll just call it kelp, is certainly one of them. It is one of these soil conditioners. It could be standalone, or it could be in a fertilizer program, which it'll be beneficial in both applications. So let's just take a little closer look at some of these attributes that make kelp meal one of the best soil additives that we might be able to use. First off, remember that kelp meal is raw organic material. It's a manure, a green manure. Like all raw organic material, it needs to be biologically broken down to realize its potential benefits. So we have a ways to go. After the kelp sort of applied into the soil, lightly worked in, got to get it mixed in a little bit, get a little moisture going, it'll begin to decomposing. It's here where the difference begins with some of your other additives, right here in the beginning. The decomposing of kelp is different than that of land-based organic material, a huge difference. In kelp, the carbohydrates are different than the land-based plants, and that's where we start right there. Kelp's carbs, most of them are, or a good portion of them, 10, 15, or maybe a little more, depending on seasonal harvesting, could be upwards maybe to 20%, depending on, again, when it's harvested, are simple sugars. And they are immediately available for plant, or more importantly, for the rhizosphere, for the bacteria, all the biology around the root zone that needs fuel. It's looking for it. So immediately available in a very simple form, usable by bacteria and the things that solubilize nutrients, protect roots, all those goodies that we probably know about are bathed in this gentle sort of food, if you will. So it provides food and fuel for beneficial bacteria and other soil organisms located in the rhizosphere. Kelp itself has very little cellulose. It doesn't need to be stiff and rigid. It's a little different. Its cell structure allows water to pass through it so it can filter out nutrients and what it needs out of the water. And that's important. So cellulose is very hard to break down. It takes a lot of bacterial energy and it takes a while for it to go down. So if I'm low in cellulose, I'm going to be more easily broken down. So the organisms can sort of benefit for more quickly. So easily broken down, less effort sort of by the local organisms, if you will, so they can get back to solubilizing nutrients that are in the soil, what they're supposed to be doing, and making that plant happy. Let me just check my notes here. Again, the decomposition is a bit faster than land-based organic conditioners, and that might be just what you need to get going. In the spring a little bit, or during the course of the year. You don't have to wait 3 months for it to fully break down. Requires less work from the rhizosphere bacteria in long-term decomposing. So once we can get them sort of busy back to their real job of solubilizing nutrients, the better it is. Bacteria can spend that time fixing the nutrients. The rhizosphere biology solubilizes nutrients. So if we get them jazzed up, we're going to be, again, eventually sort of be solubilizing nutrients. They also, by the mere fact that they're in place around the root zone, protect it physically. They also will produce, many of them as a byproduct, antibiotics and other compounds that will induce what we call systemic resistance in a plant. These are things that sort of stimulate the plant to begin sort of a low-level defense mechanism against certain diseases and possibly insect attacks. The bacteria involved, just to go back a little bit in nitrogen to explain this nitrogen tie-up, if you will. So the more cellulose you have, the longer this will take, but the nitrogen fixation is neglected essentially for a short period of time as organic material, raw organic material is broken down. So you might experience chlorosis if we were to use this as a standalone product in a more artificial soil. But in regular soils, you shouldn't really. It's a small amount, but it's over very quickly. And then you have fun. You get to release all the nutrients back. And again, those nitrogen fixing bacteria will go back to their work on the soil and they'll be jazzed up. They've got their simple sugars. They've been stimulated. They've increased. So the short-term chlorosis could also be avoided by incorporating a general fertilizer, something that's more soluble, blood meal, a fish type fertilizer where the nitrogen is quickly available and sort of could offset that temporary, albeit but temporary, but chlorosis that you might have. So those are things we can get around that chlorosis. And again, you're going to need a little nitrogen in your growing. I'm sure if you want to get some nice produce going, you're going to probably want to add in nitrogen. When we look at some of the products that he's got, 1 and 2% nitrogen are not where it's at, so to speak. That's enough to sort of supply the nitrogen needed by those same bacteria and other organisms. The plant probably doesn't even get that nitrogen. So let's get back to the other things. We didn't even get to the nutrients. I skipped ahead a little bit. Next thing we want to talk about is that kelp has been shown to have high amounts of alginic acid. Wow, that's a pretty good thing for type of soil conditioner. It's alginic acid increases water infiltration and retention. This in process helps soil to follicate or join together. The more soil structure that is created, the better air pockets to hold air and water and nutrients. So we all know that texture is important in the soil, but even more important is, do I have good soil structure? Alginic acid is a fundamental organic acid that helps improve that and will open up and allow the water to be retained in the soil that you have a little bit longer. So it's better for a lot of reasons, just in soil retention capabilities. So the high alginic acid and low percent cellulose cause its quick decomposition. And therefore also this might make a great compost starter, if you will. If you've got some compost going in the backyard or whatever it is, you put some of this in there and you sort of, again, jazzed up that bacteria. It's just going to go to work on your compost. So the improved soil structure and all those good benefits we've been talking about, with the air will be added, moisture holding in little pockets in there. And the good soil biology that creates. If it's good for growing roots, it's good for soil biology, and then they'll flourish. And again, back to, they're going to protect the root. They're going to solubilize nutrients. They have byproducts or secondary metabolites that are very important in terms of protecting the root from pathogens. Okay, sorry. So once we have the soil improved, you're going to have better plant growth, right? Better roots will in turn have better plant growth. That in turn, the more surface area, the more plant growth I have, I'm going to make more food. The increase in food production will now provide the carbs that are sort of needed to nourish the biological activity in the rhizosphere. About maybe 10 to 20% of the total carbohydrate or plant food production is actually leaked out of the roots to feed those bacteria, the same ones that we got to feed with our kelp. But now the plant really, when all is functioning quite well, produces enough food to be able to give that much away for the benefits that the bacteria, and also there are more than bacteria. There are streptomyces that are involved here, and there are other types of broad types of bacteria. One trichoderma fungus, which is a parasitic fungus. It kills other fungi, and it's important and needed to be around a root. How great is that? We get all these guys sort of jazzed up and going. So those carbs, again, are leaked out through the roots into the rhizosphere in exchange for all the good things that those organisms do. So we got good soil going. Now we're going to have good, healthy plant growth. And when it's all happening, these byproducts, again, will begin to stimulate some other things that we'll talk about a little bit down the road. So a little bit about the nutrients there. We'll slip into that. The kelp has I think we touched on this a little bit, varying amounts of nitrogen, NPK, not so much in the phosphorus at all in many cases, but the nitrogen 1 to 2, maybe 3%, depending on when you harvest it, that type of thing. But that's really not much nitrogen, and it becomes quickly available. And again, could just sort of evaporate into the atmosphere, could be used by bacteria. Maybe some will get to the plant, but it doesn't matter, because if we're using it as a soil jazzer, a biostimulant, if you will, not a fertilizer, then that's okay. We jazz that soil, we'll get the benefit on the backside. Small amount. Okay, I think we covered that. I'm sorry. Okay. So at this point, we have jazzed the soil biology, and especially in the rhizosphere, and we haven't really touched on the trace elements. So let's move into those. And there's a bunch of other goodies that kelp provides in large quantities that allow the plant to sort of function at a higher level. We talked about the cell wall structure is important because it doesn't have a root system, so it needs to filter everything out. So that's sort of that waffle-like matrix that will allow water to pass through. They can extract it. So not only is it a good source of some nitrogen, potassium, and calcium, but there's got a plentiful amount of trace elements in it that are about 70. The 16 or 20 or so that plants needed are certainly contained in this area, very small amounts. In fact, I think Sean had told me once, such small amounts that the government, the state government, won't allow them to put them on the package because they don't rise to the level. But that's okay, because we want trace elements in small amounts. And if we slowly bathe them into the soil in a soluble form, they're going to get picked up. Yes, there are all these nutrients are in the soil, but the question is, are they there at the end of the root when you need them today? I'm growing food and produce, and I need it to happen today because I only have a short growing system. So yeah, that's why we fertilize. That's why we do that, so we can sort of produce at a higher level. So not only does it have these nutrients, it is a good source of vitamins, auxins, which are basically hormones, gibberellins, controlling growth, cytokines, again, important in a lot of cellular activity. And these antibiotics are also produced. And don't forget that alginic acid. We got a lot going on here. So vitamins and things like that, these are secondary. They've been assembled by the plant now. We're not just taking raw material. And as the plant breaks down, they are released. The plant then can pick them up and use them. And they're essentially, let's call it, already manufactured in a much easier. So the plant spends less energy because it can take these things up and then benefit from that direct kind of a relationship. And again, another note, the uptake of these nutrients and secondary metabolites is enhanced by the improved roots that we did first, right? We made those roots really happy, and now we're bathing them in small amounts of soluble nutrients that can be sucked up rather quickly by that improved root system. So it's a twofer, for sure, a definite twofer. Let's make the pickup system better and then supply small amounts of delicious nutrients. So we got the idea there in small amounts. Some trace elements, we have to be careful because in certain amounts, be they not so much small, but in larger amounts, are toxic. So it's not so bad. And again, they are somewhat soluble, so they'll stay in the soil as long as it's holding water, improve soil structure. And again, they could also lightly leach away, very small amounts though. So we're not causing pollution, it's not excessive. And again, sometimes these also are picked up by other organisms. These metals and things are very important for all organisms. Most fertilizers that we come across don't contain trace elements because it costs money to put them in there. We've got a nice, slow release, soluble amount coming from the kelp. Okay, and again, like any fertilizer, we want it to be there at the end of the root when we need it there. Yes, it's in the soil, but did my root get to where that small amount of trace nutrient is today when I needed it? Maybe not. So let's put it there. Sometimes these trace nutrients in the soil are chemically unavailable too. pH. Again, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but all of this would be for naught, sort of, so to speak, if we don't keep that pH adjusted so nutrients are not tied up organically, and so we can keep them available. So pay attention to your pH. But fortunately, again, if we use soluble nutrients like in kelp, we can, for a short period of time, because they're soluble, they can be taken up. If they hang around the soil, they too will get eventually tied up in insoluble compounds. So just your pH, use something like a kelp to, again, slowly bathe small amounts of these micronutrients. You want your pH, just in case you're wondering, about 6.5, has everything you need available. And Northeast soils have abundant phosphorus, right? So the fact that we didn't have phosphorus in its soil is somewhat irrelevant because there's tons of it in our native soils. Okay, let me go back here. Trace elements. The elements are readily available, can be used as a part of complex organic catalysts. Those metals and things are hard to find, and they are important. You don't have these catalysts, these reactions going, unless you have all the ingredients. They're used in compounds in growth. Some of the auxins and things that are formed, they need special, these trace elements are extremely important. Fruit production and plant defenses are also, they need these trace elements. They're vital to make sure that all works. So vitamins, again, are another important aspect of that. So they're more complex, again, nutrients that have been put together, so to speak, already in a plant or usable form, that instead of them having to do it chemically inside the cell, I've got it done for me on the outside. One thought too about kelp meal. Why kelp meal? If you buy kelp extract, the process usually destroys the vitamins. Almost everything else is transferred over, but the vitamins are lost. Not the greatest tragedy in the world, but it's one difference between the two. But kelp meal contains all these vitamins: C, B1, B2, B12, panthenol, I don't get that one right, acid, folic acid, folinic acid, E, K, vitamin A precursors for beta carotene and floxanthin. Yeah, sorry about that. Mangling of all those names. So if we didn't have a vitamin, we have the background for the vitamin being provided to the root to take it up, and off we go. The plant elements, vitamins, auxins, the cytokines, and related plant compounds provide a biostimulant effect on plant growth, flowering, and fruit production. So when I met Sean, through Kevin, he told me he had a fertilizer company. And then he showed me all this. And I said, you don't have a fertilizer company, you have a biostimulant company, and you need to get that in the name. There was a little bit of pushback that someone said, that stuff is old hat. And I said, it doesn't matter. It's good old hat. And you got a lousy fertilizer, in my opinion, but you got an excellent soil conditioner and biostimulant, a very good one. So let's just take a look at biostimulants in general, what they might do for you. Better resist insect and pathogen attack, because all this is going on and the roots are gently stimulated to produce their defenses, because everything's doing well. They make enough food to leak out and feed all the guys around them. So everything's banging on all 8 cylinders. They will increase fruit, flower, and vegetable quality before and after harvest. Shelf life is increased, firmness. And so you get a better product. You will experience a slight yield decrease because you're reallocating food energy, right? We make food energy and you're either going to reproduce, make seeds, or have plant defenses. If we're sort of fully funded, we should be able to do all those things, but it's going to take a little more energy when you turn that switch on for these biostimulants. So a little less yield, but much better yield. So plant another row or two, so you have your yield, but you'll have a better fruit or vegetable product. Slight decrease, I already saw, a better root system. So again, that's the foundation of everything. If I got a better root system and all that going on, then I'm gonna have better food production at the top, and then food allocation to all the great things I need, whether it's a vegetable, a fruit, or have it go back down and get leaked out of the roots, or be used in plant production. So those are the effects of it. So kelp is great. Kelp meal here. We got a low carbon footprint, as I think you picked up in some of Sean's talk. I like when I want to tell people that in just like one sentence or so. They take it out of the sea, they process it right next to the sea, and then it gets shipped to you. That's it. If I'm going to make an extract, I got to take it out of the sea. I got to ship it to the extract person. They got to extract, which also takes energy, has another carbon footprint. And then they package it, and then they send it to you. Or they maybe send it to a store and you drive to get it. Now, don't you feel guilty? So this is direct and the carbon footprint is low, and that's great these days. I think that's what a lot of people are striving for, especially when it's so easily locally available. So low carbon footprint, pollutant mitigation, as we can sort of slow release and the mitigation of using traditional fertilizers that will leak out into the environment. And this is basically, I think he also said to me one time, well, I'm taking it from one place and putting it right next to it. So if it leaks a little bit back in to where it came from, that might not be so terrible. And it's been done that way apparently for quite a few hundred years. So my idea is that, boy, in a package deal, I've got a great soil condition, I got a biostimulant, and it's locally made and has a low carbon footprint. Not a whole lot more you could be asking for in a soil additive. So I sort of think that's mostly what I had to say. Let me see if I'm a little bit early, but that means that we can take a look at the video that we have. So we produced a video that talks about some of the uses for arboriculture, and you can then extrapolate this and it'll be fine in your gardens. Take a look at this. I think we need a little volume again. I don't hear it.
Yeah, Laura, I think you have to also unmute yourself in this case, which, there you go. Yeah, turn that volume up. And then your volume.
Don G.
Well, I don't hear it. I don't know if anybody else is.
No, I think we're not hearing it still.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can fill in a little bit if you wanted to watch it.
Emerald Tree and Shrub Care's mission statement is to create a sustainable environment for our community, our employees, and nature. The Montauk Seaweed Company's product of sea kelp falls right in direct alignment to our corporate mission statement.
Montauk seaweed is sustainably harvested, and that's a little different than some of the other products that are out there, because the kelp beds that are involved that are harvested are cut back a portion and allowed to regrow. So this is a farm-style sustainable operation that could be done for years and years, as it used to be done in the past, where the Native Americans would harvest and use these same products on their crops and things that they were growing.
Other products that are being used are manufactured, they're factory-based, and they're not natural. This is wonderful because it breaks down slowly, it's all organic,
and is not associated with high salt levels that you would find in commercial fertilizers.
Now, we just recently had the red tides down in Florida, and that's a direct result of people are over-applying fertilizers, nitrogen and phosphorus, and that's causing algae blooms, which then deplete the water in the oceans of oxygen and causes massive fish and shellfish kills. This material stays on target. It doesn't leach. It will not move. And if it does move for any reason, it's only returning what was already there in the ocean to begin with.
Montauk seaweed is processed by pulverizing and grinding up the seaweed to create this meal. The meal can be applied directly to annual and perennial plantings, therapy for recently transplanted plants, and would do especially well for vegetable gardens. Or we can put it in a liquid form and apply it to the root zone of the plants, so it can be delivered directly to where the roots are growing and immediately become available to the plants. if you're going to have older trees that need a little extra help, this would be a great therapeutic thing that could be done on an annual basis. And you can put in other ingredients if you so desire and use Montauk seaweed as a base. Montauk seaweed is not only a great fertilizer, but an excellent biostimulant, providing the nutrients and the root zone therapy that plants need to grow well.
Nice.
So that gives you a little more broad approach that we can use it for a lot of different things, not just farming, but gardening around your home. And also
running back and forth. Come on, buddy. Come on. Looks like there's houses over there. Look at that. They got.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, that was different. Okay, so we are closer to the question and answer period. Then I didn't get any out of the chat box, but maybe now there are some for myself or for Sean. I doubt nobody ever wants to ask him any questions, but just teasing. But let's do that now. If anybody has any thoughts or questions about either aspect of the background of Montauk Seed Company or what Kelp does for you.
Yeah, Sean, I'd be curious to hear a little bit more of like the scope of your operations, how, you know, how many growers you're working with, processing facilities, things like that.
Yeah, great question, Doug. And I think, so the scope of our operation, we're a true bootstrapped, small scale startup. But what we've done is our mantra is get by with a little kelp from your friends. And over the years, we've built up a lot of good, strong relationships, not only with local kelp farmers, but with the folks that are helping us to do processing on the land side right now. So the Route 27 hemp yard in Eastern Long Island, which does hemp drying, we found that there's parallels with the type of processing that we need to do to get the dehydration rates that we need for these kelp meals. It works very well in the existing hemp drying system. So we're a very small output right now in our first year. I think the bulk of our first summer and fall season, which Don and Kevin were leading on the arboreal side with arborists. We were doing a lot of work, as you saw, with Shinnecock and with Edwina and some of the folks with gardens, home gardens and lawns, some local landscapers doing some lawn work, some of our local CSAs, or the Nick and Tony's farmers that you saw, doing more or less kind of sampling and experimenting in the first season. I'll say we've learned a ton of lessons in the first year, almost year of our existence. But for this upcoming year, we've now partnered with some pretty formidable kelp farmers in Maine, also in Massachusetts on the Cape, and we're putting together a larger team of producers. So the two interesting parts about kelp farming is that it happens now. It's a cold season crop that grows in the colder months. So this is our growing season right now, which is obviously the opposite of land. And that obviously lends itself to our harvest season is kind of right in June, which is an optimal time when a lot of the local land-based operations will be needing kelp. I think, and another enormous part, Don did a really good job of diving deep into the soil science and the organic chemistry, which was never my strong suit. So thank you, Don, for taking us deep into that zone. But the theme of this conference, and I think probably the most pressing and overarching kind of benefit that we're looking to kelp, like why kelp, you know, like Don said, and for farmers, for gardeners on the soil side, there are myriad benefits, a broad constellation of benefits to applying kelp meal to your soil.
Can I get in another question?
Yeah.
This is Joseph Heckman, and I'm a soil scientist. And Don, you gave us the nitrogen concentration. You said it was 1 to 2%. You said there was very little phosphorus. Could you actually put down a number for that?
0.
Okay. How about potassium?
4 or 5, depending on where you harvest them from.
Okay.
So,
calcium.
Calcium, Don, you got that? You're muted, Don G.
Can't
Don,
hear you.
Don's on mute.
Sorry about that. I have one of your analysis here and I don't have the calcium on it, but phosphorus was, again, about 1/4%. Did you get to tell that to him?
Yeah, it's close.
Okay.
The state considers that 0.
Well, right, but it's and the
Potassium.
potassium about 3.5 to 4%. And then again, we go down. All the other ones are very, very minor.
How
in
about
terms of-
magnesium? You
Hey,
have it?
Joe, I can give you a full, I'll put in
Yeah.
the chat a full link to our we do all of our lab analyses. They're kind of lengthy.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah,
Here's
no
the calcium. I'm sorry, here's the calcium on the Regency. And that's your other product, I believe, Sean.
That's
And
sugar.
it is the rockweed is 1.85% calcium.
And
Okay.
what's the sugar?
Magnesium.
Magnesium is 0.85. Wait a minute, on the rockweed, excuse me, 1.5.
Okay, sulfur. Have sulfur?
Don't see sulfur on this one.
How about sodium, since it's coming from the sea? How much sodium?
Yeah, about 4.5%.
All right, Joe and Don, if you guys could hold that thought for 1 sec, is that the big picture here, as I was saying, is carbon capture. And I think that's the part of this conversation that when I was saying, like, why kelp? Why is it important to be using kelp in your soil? We're doing a lot of studies with Cornell Cooperative Extension in New York about the benefits of kelp for soil and for produce, for vegetables and flowers and trees. But there's separate lines of study being done on carbon capture in kelp. So kelp as a species captures a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere, and sugar kelp specifically, we use the range of like 5 times more carbon being captured than land-based plants. So in lieu of the planet being on fire and our need to start removing carbon rapidly out of the atmosphere, I think that's the one piece of the puzzle here, where Don touched upon food miles and transport carbon and things like that, and the importance of local production and local distribution on the land side. But on the sea side, in the ocean, in the actual process of farming kelp, that's where a lot of the interest and enthusiasm and excitement and hope is coming from, is that these kelp farms are now capturing and pulling a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere, which will then be burying into the soil. So there's a bigger picture here that is obviously jives with the theme of the conference here, thriving in the era of climate change. I think kelp as a carbon capture entity is something that we're paying a lot of attention to.
Joe, I just also wanted, I wrong on the sodium. The dried material, 2.8%, much lower than I first said. Sorry about that.
Looks like Luis has a hand up.
Actually, I wanted to come back to Luis in a second. If I could ask Priscilla's question about the recipe for diluting kelp in water, and then follow up to that was its applications in compost tea. What do you think about that?
Okay, well, what used in that video, it's about 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. So when that guy was, working his root zones, he's basically putting a bunch of products into that hopper and applying them over 1,000 square feet at that rate, essentially. So he's just using that flat rate, knowing that if he mixes, say 100 gallons, he's going to be able to spread it or pump it in a grid. Sometimes they inject it into the root zone. Other times they'll water over the top of it. Does that get close enough? Well, to answer the question? No? Yes?
If Priscilla, if you want to ask a clarifying question, you're welcome
Yeah.
to.
You can unmute and go ahead.
Yes, our company has brewed compost tea for many years, and we've also done granular soil amending with kelp, and we have seen these very good results, particularly here where phosphorus is too high, there's not much potassium, and trace minerals kind of on the low side too. I have a couple of clients with problems with not enough boron, but probably the boron is not significant. Am I right?
I don't see it mentioned even on, oh, wait a minute, boron. parts per million, I guess, very low at about 225 in the rockweed. I think that's what it is. So yeah, but again, small amounts of soluble.
Small
are a
amounts,
good
right,
thing.
and over a sustained period too. But I'm interested to see those guys put it in a spray tank, similar to what we have, and use
Yeah.
it. But they were adding other things, you say.
Well, they
as a-
can. They might not have in
Yeah.
that thing, but in that case, so we're not composting. It's just liquefying the material and delivering it in the liquid. But you could compost it too. So
Yeah,
that would be a
well-
low level extraction, just to have water, let it, like brew in a brewer. You would get most everything out, not all the benefits apparently. So, in my mind, if that's all you could do is a tea, that's great. Otherwise, I'm always a proponent for the physical material because you get the benefits of the plant parts breaking down and all that kind of soil structure improvement that we like to see. So it could be used, again, compost starter. You could make it into a tea or just put it in water like they did, and you're just delivering it because they grind it even further. They grind that in, he knows the size thing, but it's like, it does not solubilize. It's just being, carried in the water. It needs to be
Carried,
agitated.
right.
Agitate.
Yeah, okay, very interesting. Would it have trouble going through the sprayer, or how fine of particle is it?
So he does have a much larger screen mesh in for that application. You can't completely take it out, but because he puts other like we'll call them biological type things through, he already has had that problem where you might have a little bit of material on a fine mesh screen. So he's got a very much more open screen for that process.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. All right, thank you.
Thank you for your question, and thanks for waiting, Luis. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm very interested in super compost recipes, and so I would like to know about what would be the best way to apply kelp on a soil that is going to be cooking for 60 days or 90 days before, if that would be on a soluble way or a raw material. That's one question. And another one is I would like to have recommendations on books about soil science and compost recipes. If any one of you knows that, I would be love to have them on the link of the chat or something, some way.
I can't help you with the books, but for a suggestion you could put it in early or just after composting starts, but you don't want to go too late because then the process is already starting on its own. I would, as you begin your composting, put some in right there, and I would not go lower than maybe a half a pound per 1,000 square feet, only because I think, you could go a little bit higher. It's not going to do anything. It actually might jumpstart a little faster, but don't go any less than a half pound. And once you lay down whatever it is you're going to compost, I would blend that in sort of more on the top or something, make sure it's going to get wet, and it'll start to go fast. And as your material breaks down, if you got a 60-day breakdown cycle, I think put it in as early as possible, and then let it go. Get some moisture in there and let it go. As for books, I'd have to defer that to maybe someone could send you another link. There are so many books out there. That's a hard one. Anybody else got a question?
Yeah, feel free to chime in. One of my questions was about do you own do your own kelp hatchery in that system?
So we actually, great question. And so this is different by state to state to state. Here, we're in the mid-Atlantic region, just the first state south of New England states. A number of New England states do have their own commercial hatcheries. Largely up to now, the kelp conversation has lived in the nonprofit or the research academic zone. So a lot of universities have their own nurseries. A lot of nonprofits kind of work with nurseries, but being able to access nurseries on a commercial grade, we've just created the first commercial grade kelp nursery here in New York, retrofitting a former lobster kind of operator in the town dock area. So we now have the first commercial grade kelp nursery here, but we're literally creating these things as we go. This past summer, we actually pushed forward the kelp bill, which made it legal to farm kelp in New York. So state by state is all different. New York is really late to the game, but Massachusetts has its own commercial kelp nurseries. Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, most New England states are already equipped with commercial kelp nurseries. But this is truly a fledgling industry that's just kind of coming together and coming out of the academic and nonprofit world into the commercial space. So it's kind of an exciting time to be here, but also we have a lot of work to do.
Could you talk any bit about, you know, some of the other products that you might be using your kelp for, or is it like, are you really like super focused on getting into the soil, or would you be putting it into maybe like other places? I don't know.
No, fantastic question, Doug. And I think that we always look to the 3 F's for kelp outputs, and that's food, fertilizer, and fuel. So we spend a lot of time working in the kelp food space. I could talk about that in a longer separate session. We launched Eat More Kelp, and we did a ton of work with our existing network of chefs and tried to really push hard to get kelp in the food category. There are some really pioneering companies, Akua, Atlantic Seed Farms, Blue Evolution, that are now getting kelp products into the food space and ready for consumers. I think 97 or 98% of kelp products in the food space are imported from overseas right now. So we have the first kind of generation of new pioneering entrepreneurial food producers in that space. We had spent probably 5 or 6 years pushing very hard in that space, but then started to realize, for a number of reasons I won't get into, largely to do with volume, the food space just doesn't absorb a lot of volume. So we looked at how much output was about to start coming this season, next season, about metric tons of kelp. Maine just broke their state record last year with almost, I think, 890,000 pounds of sugar kelp. We're just not, the food sector can't absorb all that. So we are not really savvy enough to start messing around with kelp as a fuel, as a biofuel. That takes a whole separate kind of science and things going on. But we realized that the kelp fertilizer space and feed and fertilizer, animal feed, are kind of in that same category, that you have low processing, you have high output, and a lot of impact. So when we're trying to gauge, like, how do we capture all this carbon into the kelp farms, the kelp sinks, and then there's a whole series of things that have to happen as far as like creating microeconomies that the farmers are getting paid, the processors are getting paid, creating a marketplace. We realized that for a small, scrappy startup like ourselves with limited resources, and we're going to throw everything we've got into it, that our biggest point of impact was going to be the fertilizer space. So I think that's where you're going to see our energies and efforts focused indefinitely.
Sean, can I talk about Sea Boost a little bit?
Go for it, Don. Yeah, have at it.
So along those lines too, he does have another product I help him work on a little bit. I'm not sure, when it'll be available and all that, but let me just tell you, he calls it Sea Boost, and we worked in a little bit, a small percentage, about 10% roughly, I think, of oyster shells, which again, another byproduct from his area. I had suggested I needed a certain thing to add in. He says, well, I can get that. So Sea Boost has this low percentage, and the seashells themselves are a source of calcium carbonate. So at that percentage, it's like a small application of lime. And we had those Northeast soils, and we are always acidifying when we use organic material. What a great combination. But not only that, these oyster shells are high in chitin. And I don't know, this is another separate talk too, but chitin is a major player in induced systemic resistance. And the biostimulant qualities that we talked about earlier are enhanced to a larger degree. So this product would be a little more, again, appropriate, sort of, it puts it on steroids almost in terms of what it might do for your plant in the biostimulant area, and be very much insect and disease resistant as much as the plant is capable. And then at the same time, trying to keep that soil in that luxury zone pH with smaller applications. So you might not do it multiple times a year, but 1 year of one application of this during the course of the year, and supplemented with just straight kelp and other applications. And one more I'm trying to get him to work on is, the ultimate would be, could we get another byproduct, a C byproduct in there to give us that extra nitrogen that we all probably want to see. Can I get to a 5 or 6% nitrogen, whether it's soluble or insoluble or whatever? We're working on that. The whole fish thing, we could use fish meal, but then we're back to what he mentioned earlier. That doesn't always get over, right? So that's I call it the next product, trying to work on something like that. So Sea Boost coming soon.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, and that's an important point. And it's also a very valuable lesson that we learned out of the land farmer space in whole harvest utilization. So working with Dan Barber years ago in the food waste space, a lot of these ideas that we're bringing now are kind of ripened and being put into practice. We learned the seeds of these ideas were planted years ago from organic land farmers, NOFA members in Massachusetts and New York, and Blue Hill at Stone Barns and Quail Hill. But a big part was whole harvest utilization. So back to your question, Doug, about outputs, that's another really important part of what we do, is that the food, fertilizer, fuel space, in the food space, probably 30% of the overall kelp harvest on the East Coast would be food grade, culinary grade, edible kelp. But now you've got, similar to seafood, which is about a 50% waste in processing, sugar kelp as a species, you've got stipes, like a whole series of anatomy there that's not culinary grade, that's not really, wouldn't be for food use. So that's where the feed part and the fertilizer part comes in, is we actually are pulling from a lot of the kelp farmers. They'll take the tender leaf, the culinary grade kelp, and allocate that into the food sector. And then we're kind of creating a sector where they can then push all of their quote unquote waste. It's not truly waste. We're figuring out purposes for it, but that's where, and ultimately the goal there being that we can then support these new kelp farmers with a full economy, that they have multiple outlets to sell their whole harvest. So what Don was talking about, we're also then obviously the commercial fishery in Montauk and elsewhere has a lot of waste. So our bigger down the road goals are certainly to start tying these waste streams out of the kelp industry into the waste streams from the commercial fishery, and start producing local, high quality, fair priced, low carbon, negative carbon products from the sea. And that's the bigger picture vision for the sea to soil movement.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. There's a question down below here just about your prices. Like, how do you handle wholesale or working with distributors, things like that?
Yeah, it's extremely expensive. And we have a saying that like good fertilizer is not cheap and cheap fertilizer is not good, right? So where each one of our 1 pound of Regency sugar kelp, let's say, actually is about 20-ish pounds of wet kelp. So that's one of the big Achilles heel in this process, is that we have about a 90% dehydration rate. So if I have a 10,000 pound haul of sugar kelp and I dehydrate the ocean water out of there, I'm left with only 10%, so 1,000 pounds. So a big, huge piece of the foundation that we're building is living wages and fair prices to farmers. So we're targeting this kind of like, we're making this up as we go, but we're targeting in the range of like $1 per pound to the actual farmer. So if you start with that as your base, we're already at 20 bucks a pound just before we do anything. 20 pounds of kelp that we purchase from a kelp farmer. So then we have our hemp drying facilities, packaging, processing, all of those expenses. And what that means is that we have to sell direct. We actually can't go through distributors. The price point, there's a ceiling there. We're at the ceiling, if not above the ceiling, of what consumers are typically, especially when you compare it to the existing marketplace, which is just completely flooded with imports and kind of radioactive toxic products in a lot of ways. So for a local, artisanal, negative carbon, all the important things, we have to find a specific demographic that is values aligned with us. NOFA seems to be the central headquarters for those folks. So we're happy to be with you guys today, but I think we're expensive. I'll say it right out of the gates. And we are currently, where we're selling is at our break even point. So we're just hovering right now, trying to figure out how can we get these products. And what Don had talked about was starting to blend in lower cost blend products, oyster shells, scallop shells, fish innards, things like that, that we can dehydrate and start to blend and mix to bring that raw cost down that we ultimately will be able to pass along to the consumer. But right now, I think I personally get a little sticker shock when I'm like, wow, man, this stuff is really expensive. But we also have a lot of good muscle memory in this space from the seafood industry 10 years ago. A lot of these same market realities, you know, the same conversations are repeating themselves with people who get like, how could this be that expensive? And we're like, the better question is, how could all that other stuff be so cheap? So we'll get there. One step, we're moving, we'll get there.
Cool. And sort of back to the animal feed question, can you speak about towards the process of are there many differences between handling the food for animal feed versus fertilizer, and what would those be?
Yeah, definitely. So we've done a number of firsts here in New York with New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, and just becoming the first fertilizer producer to use exclusively ingredients from the sea. We just got licensed as the first feed producer to use ingredients kelp exclusively from the ocean. And so in that space, when I speak with farmers, Stone Barn seems to be the central kind of nucleus of our operation as far as testing and bringing these products and figuring out a lot of these questions. I think that they are currently looking at, you know, the feed, the livestock feed sector, just like the fertilizer sector, is really filled with a lot of imports, a lot of untraceable, a lot of like, you know, questionable. There really hasn't been a hard light shined on that industry yet. So we're bringing our big spotlight into that space. And I think that the potential output, once again, it's a volume question. So the potential output for, if you can imagine, also the sheep and cows don't eat altogether that much of kelp. Although they will, that's the one we get back from a lot of our farmer friends that say you have to like lock it away, and put, like the goats specifically will like ain't no mountain high enough. They'll figure out a way to get to the kelp and eat the whole bag if you let them. So we're really just now probing and experimenting in that space. We just became the first licensed feed producers. This will be the first season that we're going to have some prototype, the Montauk Sea stock that we're creating specifically for livestock feed that's coming online probably in June or July. So I'll be able to answer a lot of these questions with some in the rear view mirror by about 6 months from now, Doug. But from right now, we're still very much in our crawling before we walk phase in the feed category.
I don't want to dominate too many of the questions here, but I'm coming through with a couple more from the chat. One was a clarifying question about application rates. So I think, Don, you were talking maybe about how much compost to apply versus how much of the kelp meal maybe to apply per area. Could you?
Yeah, no, I was talking about the question was Lewis, I believe, wanted to activate, or he was queuing on that idea. So I would just say that maybe he didn't need the full rate, but I wouldn't go too low to him. So that was more why I don't know that there's a compost rate. It's just me sort of extrapolating, knowing what the stuff does. So that was my point that back then. Does that help out at all? No.
Yeah, I think two different products. And while we're talking about application, is it OMRI certified for application on organic farms?
Sean?
Sorry, one more time, Doug.
Is it ORMI? Is it ORMI certified? I believe.
Oh, Omri. Yeah. So Regency. Yeah, Regency is now, we're working with Bill Wolf from Omri, and Regency is now in the final phase of, I was just emailing with him yesterday. So Regency, we have two products currently. One is the Regency, which is a locally farmed sugar kelp product. That's a fine powder. That is right on the verge of being Omri listed. The second is our seed to soil product, which is a local artisanally harvested rockweed. That is NOFA organic, but is deeper in the pipeline of the Omri certification process. But we anticipate our sugar kelp product will be Omri certified by the end of the first quarter. So we're looking at like probably April before this real season ramps up And I would say our rockweed seed to soil, it's hard to say right now. That office, like everywhere else, has gotten majorly delayed and disrupted with COVID and things like that. So a lot of the dates that we had already set forth, we've missed, but we just had some minor discrepancies on the packaging having to be directly precise, like minor things, like there were some typos. Basically, that's where we're at. And so I would say our Regency sugar kelp product will be OMRI certified by or around, knock wood, we're in COVID, but I would say April.
Bay State Organic Certifiers has also reviewed the products before we can put them on the bulk order. So prior to OMRI certification, they've been approved by Bay State.
Right.
Well, we're about that time. Oh, here, good question, Priscilla. What does a kelp farm look like when you're looking at it from the perspective of most of us?
Yeah, that's a great question, Priscilla. And the answer is not much. It's a couple of buoys on top of the water. And I think, and that's important for us, especially where we're located in the Hamptons. As Laura knows, in the Montauk area, we have a lot of NIMBY, a lot of not in my backyard or not in my beach yard. That people do not like to see obstructions or disruptions to their ocean views. So two things on that front. One, luckily for us, as I mentioned, it is a winter crop. So we're growing right now and there's no boat traffic. There's much less. The migration pattern for the Hamptons and the East End obviously is much more amplified in the summer months when we're not growing. But if you came out now, and you're welcome to come out, we have COVID protocols in place, obviously, but you're welcome to come check out anytime. The first New York State commercial kelp farm is now in place by Fire Island, which you can find on a map by the Fire Island Breach. And if you took a look at it, you would just say, wow, it looks like about 20 basketballs on top of the water, just small buoys there, and all of the growth is happening beneath the water. So there's really not much at all to see. And I would say, but even closer to home, I just did a royal tour of the entire East Coast, up to Maine, back and visited a half a dozen farmers. And Chatham Kelp out by you guys is got a really great operation. They welcome visitors to come check them out. They're working on some really cool kelp teas, and they have some big old vats that they've been brewing since last season, which stinks and it smells terrible, but I suspect it's going to be some of the most potent fertilizer, biostimulant liquid forms coming into the season. So if you're interested to visit a kelp farm in your area, I would say Chatham Kelp guys, Rick specifically, they would love to have visitors anytime. So would we, if you're in the New York area. And Laura, if you're coming back this way anytime soon, we'd love to take you out for a tour.
I love it. Yeah, I can't wait to see more of these operations popping up here on the North Shore where I am. And it seems like there's a gap between Maine and the Southern Cape, the other Cape, up here on Cape Ann. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that happen. And so if you're here in this conversation, you might also be interested in the recording from this morning's conversation where we talked about this aquaculture and the connections with land-based aquaculture and some of the other models that are out there, and specifically how Maine manages a lot of its ocean resources. And also coming up next in the next series, we have another event with, I forget now, Eric Birnham, who is working for the UNH Sea Grant program, and we'll be presenting a little bit about the different things, mussel farms, scallops, oyster farms, and also their integrated multi-trophic aquaculture program. So that I'm looking forward to coming up next. So with all of that, I'll wrap it up here. It's my great pleasure. Just thank you so much for being here, especially, our members here who are making all this work possible. Please take a moment to fill out that evaluation that Laura dropped into the chat. It really helps to make our programs better. As well, take a look at the vendor marketplace where you get to see some of these great vendors and some of them have offered generous discounts. We encourage you to check out our auction, which is live until tomorrow at 6 p.m. where you can get some really cool stuff. As well, if you are an organic land care professional, this section This workshop counts towards 1.5 credits of continuing education for you. And then as I mentioned, we've got more sessions coming up tomorrow. Precious Fury, our keynote speaker, is going to be a great session, so please come back for that. And of course, these recordings are available to everyone who registered. Keep a hold of your program book that has contact information for presenters, and you'll want to update it to make sure you have all the correct links to the next event. And that's all. I'll leave this room open just for another second while you're closing out if you want to save links and things like that.
Doug, apparently the link that I posted for the eval has an error in it, and I'm copying it directly from my other sheet, so it apparently has either changed or been corrupted somehow. I don't know if you have a newer one.
Let's see, hopefully this one works.
All right, thank you to everyone so much for coming out today and for your interest in this topic. We're really grateful and appreciate it. Don, thank you so much for having my back on the soil science spot. And we're at montaukseaweed.com. You can find our contact info on there. We're on Instagram and all the other fun stuff if you guys are interested to follow along on this journey. But we're just super grateful. Thanks again, Laura and Doug, for a great event. Please tell David and Jason I said thanks again to those guys for organizing. And over and out. I'm Sean. We're gonna get by with a little kelp from your friends.
Yeah, and 2.5 months till planting season. See you all later.
Thanks, Don. Lewis, you dropped a question in the chat I wanted to come back to. It was a little off topic, but since we're here, you're an indoor cannabis farmer and you're wondering if you can become NOFA members, which is yes. We're open, membership is for all. And was your question also about being certified organic? Yeah, you're on mute. And actually Laura was here for a second, who could speak to that, but I think, it's another,
Yes, we would like to get certified organic and be members of NOFA. My experience in Vermont being a member of NOFA, it's great. So I would like to replicate my experience in Massachusetts too.
Yeah, we would definitely welcome you. And then, with cannabis, if it's, we're working with the probably Bay State Organic Certifiers, who is our local organic certifying agency. So you would basically submit your organic certification paperwork to Bay State Organic Certifiers.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Well, I think I'm going to close it out here, and I look forward to seeing you at the next event. Adios.